just north of here on the coast, a baby whale was stranded. 20 tons on the beach, and people spent days and nights working to free it, protecting it from the sun, covering it with water. And eventually, it was released back to the ocean. They put in a lot of effort. If you had been staying there at the time, would you have helped?
Yeah.
If it had been a tinny, a little tin boat that was washed up instead. Or maybe it was something more complex, like a small 20-ton autonomous sub. You might have thought many things, but would you have helped it get back to deep water? Okay, where I want to go in this talk is to bring an awareness of the social into our conversations about consciousness, in particular, integrated information. So the starting point is going to be raising a series of questions. Questions about artificial consciousness. And the point I want to get to there is that I think integrated information can provide a new way to look at social dynamics in artificial creatures. The second part is going to show a methodology for studying social dynamics. I can't give a talk about robots without showing a video that has a robot in it, so there's a short video with a robot in it. And then the final part will be coming back to how this might help an engineer. Okay, so you know where I'm coming from. Pete said I'm a computer scientist by PhD, and then a cognitive scientist. My work is in bio-inspired computation, so I'm really interested in computational principles at all different levels, from cells through to whole organisms and even to societies. So I want to start asking what sort of a thing, as a modeler, I want to know what kind of mechanisms artificial consciousness would be. Would it be, in what ways would it be similar to biological consciousness? In what ways might we expect it to be different? So if you're thinking about flight, planes in some ways are similar to birds, in other ways they're very different. Okay. The principles of aerodynamics might be similar, but the mechanisms, feathers, are very different. Okay, so one of the first questions is consciousness as a phenomenon like a thunderstorm? When you simulate a thunderstorm, at least when you simulate it with an information processing model, no one gets wet. Alternatively, is consciousness like addition? When you simulate addition, if you do it well, you actually do addition. You get something that is an addition machine. It's not just a simulated but not factual machine. The third question is it something like pain? We have a phenomenal experience of pain. When I hurt my hand, the pain feels like it's in my hand. But if my arm is amputated, we know from many studies that I can still have that pain in the hand that's no longer there. Now, it's certainly not where the hand is gone, if it's feeding worms or anything else. The pain is actually in our heads. But our phenomenal experience, if we trust what we feel, we're going to be misled. And particularly if we're pain researchers and we want to mitigate pain in patients, it's important not to be misled. So if we're interested in consciousness, is it something like this? So the position that I'm taking in this talk, I'll tell you my personal position is that I actually think it's possibly a little bit of all three of them. If we're talking about the information processing in consciousness, I think we can treat information processing in a model. But with the beautiful work that Professor Kanyoshi showed us, I do think that there's an embodied component, particularly when we're talking about things like feelings. I'm not going to get to talk about the feelings that you think is the essence of this. I'm going to be talking about the information side in this talk. But I also think But there are many cases in which we are misled by our feelings of what consciousness is. And by studying some of the other components that are relevant, we might get a handle on how we can see a bit more about what's going on. Okay, so this is a question I wanted to do a short straw poll here. Is consciousness, or at least integrated information, an optional extra for artificial minds? So if we're building a robot, or we're building some particular model, we've got our conscious robot. Is that some zombie robot plus a consciousness module? Can we tack it on? Can we have zombie robots without consciousness, and conscious robots that are just adding this to it? So could I have a show of hands? How many people here think that it's possible that we could have zombie robots, add a consciousness module, and get conscious robots? How many people would say yes? Yes? How many people would say no? Thank you. Undecided? Okay. So, of the people here who subscribe to an integrated information view of consciousness, how many people there would say this is possible? That came down to one person. I didn't mean it to be. Of the people who would...
Yeah, I guess, I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong, but module C is the only part that is conscious. So anything you add, it's like, extra stuff that is irrelevant for this, module C. So adding actually doesn't mean anything in this case.
So the question is there anything in this part? Can you actually have a zombie robot? Could a zombie robot exist?
Definitely.
That's a yes? No?
Or can you have a module C is the other question. Is there such a thing as a module C?
Some people don't think this is
tear it
possible,
down
some people don't think that's
I
possible.
mean, is the idea that the zombie robot and the conscious robot we should be able to discriminate them? Or is adding a module, is that changing the way the zombie robot behaves?
I guess I should have said, okay, an intelligent zombie robot. A zombie robot that can do things they might do in the movies.
I think the confusion comes a bit because this is just not how it would work, the equation. Right? It's not that you have the intelligent robot and then you add something to it. I mean, and then it becomes conscious. It will be a totally different robot that then might have the structure to be conscious.
So this is where I think I want to get in this conversation is, I mean, my own personal answer, and I'm not sure that I'm representing II properly, but if consciousness in this case is integrated information, then I don't think smart zombie robots are possible. I think if they are smart, they will have integrated information. And therefore, if the definition is right, they're going to be conscious in this definition. I would say consciousness is inherent in the design of intelligent beings. It's not a tack-on module that you can add to the system.
Just a quick question. Isn't it then the view that you're associating intelligence and consciousness to be the same thing?
Am I equating them to be the same thing? In this particular case, I don't think so. I think intelligence entails many things. But I think if it is intelligent in its behaviours, it will be conscious. It doesn't mean they're identical, though.
As in experience, conscious as in having experience?
Having integrated information. I mean, integrated information. So I'm actually leaving the embodiment, the feeling part of it, to the side for this part. Okay. Let me just show you one more.
One more question.
Oh, yes, sorry.
I wonder if you are also implying intelligent design of the robot or on the intelligent behavior of it, because according to this IIT, you could have a field forces that you can do anything with the integrated systems to do.
Yeah, I've heard that claim. As someone who deals with neural networks, feed forward systems cannot replicate grammars and all sorts of other interesting behaviours. So I personally don't believe you can have a feed-forward system that over a period of time can have dynamical behaviour that's equivalent to one that has feedback. Okay? Yeah, I mean, that's one point of difference in terms of what you believe systems can do.
Just a point of clarification. It seems like a big part of this whole workshop is to work out if integrated information is consciousness. And you seem to have taken a step that you're saying intelligence is integrated information. Yes. But you don't want to say anything about the phenomenology and experience. That's a separate thing.
For the moment, I'd like to put them aside and just say how far.
So when you use the word consciousness, you're actually just meaning integrated information.
I'm just, yeah.
Perception.
I'm just, I should replace substitute C/II for this part of the top, yeah. Definitely. I'm not getting to that fundamental question.
The experience of whether this being we're talking about, so you're sort of saying if you add module C to the robot, it might still not have anything in its life to be that robot. I
don't believe the robot could have interesting behavior, interesting smart behavior without having something it's like to be that robot. But when I was asked to be part of this workshop, one of the things that intrigues me is integrated information is a beautiful set of equations, and I think it has power to help us in robot design, which is not the purpose of this workshop, but it's one of my purposes. So I'm bringing a slightly different perspective here. Okay. So this is the final question. Will integrated information increase or decrease when you have two entities, X and Y? They might be two cells in evolutionary history coming together. They might be two neural regions when they are tightly coupled. So this is not the same as asking what's phi of the entire system, because at least my understanding is you would need to know every possible partition to be able to calculate what that was and work out the main complex. This, I think, is a much easier question to ask. It's a compositional question saying we have two entities. Think of them as two cells. Think of them as two neural regions. When those two become tightly coupled, when the cortex and the hippocampus both have a similar phase and frequency, they oscillate together, their behaviours are coupled, will integrated information increase or decrease? Depends. It's a trick question. It depends. And it depends very much on what that coupling process is. And this is a claim that I think I share with many other people. In particular, I think it's one that Pete would share in this. High integrated information in a coupled system requires both integration and segregation over time. I didn't add time here, but let me show you an instance of what I mean by coupling, because we've seen at the conference, we've seen many instances of this. Okay, so this is a network developed by Pete Stratton called the Complex Cross-Coupling Network. It was designed to illustrate how, well, initially it started off by studying how complex dynamics can be sustained in a spiking network without external input. Okay, so many spiking networks sustain their dynamics when you constantly pump in plus or noise. In this particular one, you don't have to. So I won't go through all the details, but basically there's a layer of neurons, say 1,000 neurons, and there are some feedback loops. You can think of this as the cortex and these as homeostatic mechanisms or other layers within the system. If we study how these 1,000 neurons are coupled to each other, those coupling mechanisms radically change the dynamics. So here's 1,000 neurons. This is time. This is 10 seconds of simulated activity. In this particular one, make sure I get this right. Okay. In this particular one, the neurons are all connected to their neighbours in proportional to the distance. And what you see is waves of activity propagating. You can see these propagations of activity over time. If you separate them out, so you have one group of neurons all coupled to each other, the other group coupled to each other, what you get is this dynamic switching behavior. Now, so this group is all connected to itself, this group connected. The reason why they switch is because they're coupled through these other homeostatic mechanisms. If you reduce the radius of the inhibition, you get varied assemblies, and if you add shorter synaptic dynamics, you get some really interesting behaviors in the way the system goes into and out of spontaneously goes into and out of seizure. So there's a lot more to the model, and some of you will have talked to Pete at the conference last week, so this is from his poster. But it's really just a way of thinking about how complex dynamics can be sustained. And my understanding is this particular system would have high phi because it's integrated when it's operating in the complex regime. Okay. Sorry?
Can you clarify a bit more in what sense it is integrated?
Oh, in what sense it's integrated?
It's in the bottom left panel, with the dynamic regime, you consider the most integrated, I guess?
In this particular case, I would say all of them are integrated, because you cannot take the behavior of one of these of any one of the neurons, without its behavior affecting all of the others and all of the others affecting it. So over time, the system, you cannot decouple the system into neurons that have no effect, or subcomponents, each of which do not affect each other. In this particular case, these 1,000 neurons are all coupled together very strongly. We can go into that in more detail, but and we might hear more about how you'd actually choose to calculate that. So where I think this is going in the kind of work that I want to talk about, particularly social dynamics, integration I see as a dynamic phenomenon, and this is where I think it really does depart from how I've understood it in the literature. There is a lot of transient coupling. The coupling, when we can think of a system, two cells coming together, interacting and then going their separate way, perhaps having affected each other, when a system is coupled, it's high phi, and that's higher than the separate phis of the two components. But then when a system segregates, okay, two individuals might come together, interact, go their separate ways, you would actually find, for a period of time at least, the individual phis would combine to give you a higher phi than this. You would also get cases where the system was very tightly coupled, so tightly coupled that these two constrain each other not to give an increased repertoire of behaviour, but actually reducing the repertoire of both. For example, if two systems lock together and cannot move anymore, you've definitely reduced the phi of both. So there are cases where coupling can reduce it, and cases where it increases it. So coming back to this notion as a computational model, what does phi measure? At least my understanding, phi as a capacity has been discussed. It's the potential that matters. There's a paper that I've been reading by Byron Bay, looking at it in terms of a process. I've done this as high prime. And what I'm thinking of here is something that we might think of as a transiently integrated state, rather than trying to think of the entire system over all time. So this is really just trying to understand the nature of it, but rather than contributing primarily to the theory of this, what I want to take away from it is a way of thinking about integrated information that I hadn't done before. And this is that the timescales of integrated episodes should be predictable from the coupling of their components. So if we're talking about two plant roots that are coupling through sound, we should be looking at the timescales of that coupling and those responses to ask what that dynamic should be. Brain regions synchronize over a vast range of timescales. So this is from Bujaki and Mitsuzaki looking at, this is the power in various frequencies. This is during sleep. So this is only 2 orders of magnitude, but if you look over brains over weeks at a time, you go from very high power, power in every single frequency. So this is a range of frequency bands that have been named and have been observed in active brains. Fast local coupling, if you want to work within a brain region, within a visual cortex, you might have a very fast coupling, gamma, but if you want to talk between 2 regions, gamma is too fast. They can't synchronize fast enough. There is a delay between them. You need slower synchrony. So, and if you're going to sustain coupling over a very long period of time, you need much slower timescales. So the way I think of the brain and its coupling is that there are multiple different ways in which the system can couple. The brain is a vastly parallel machine. Most of the time, a lot of the neurons can probably do their job without needing to be integrated at all. It's when they need to be that you get this coupling. And when they don't need to be, they can break apart. So you could see these complexes forming and breaking apart. And I think this is the kind of thing that has been measured in some of Nau's work, where we actually see this transience over time. So the question that I started with, and the place where I sort of got to in this part, is how short can a conscious moment be, or how short can a social moment be? The social is a very interesting phenomenon in the study of artificial minds. Typically when we're thinking about social phenomena, particularly in psychological phenomena a lot of the time, we think social behaviours are built on top of cognitive behaviours. So our cognitive behaviours are often in the range of 1 to 2 seconds. And you put together those cognitive behaviours, our ability for memory, for humans, in language, in reasoning, and you get these longer timescales. And those are the social dynamics. But one of the things we've been looking at is the social moments that enable connection between individuals at very fast timescales. So things like, we were analysing some data with colleagues in San Diego, a tutor and a student. The tutor would flick and look at the student and come back. And that eye flick was about 2 frames in the video. So about 60 milliseconds. Certainly less than 100 milliseconds. This kind of monitoring behaviour, there are a lot of different social moments that are very, very fast. And they've come up in particular I want to tell you about a study with a robot and a rat, and this is unpublished data, so I'd ask you to respect this until it's
Should I stop?
That would be nice. Yeah, I'm not enough, across their behaviours to be able to interpret that. But it would be interesting for us to know. One of the things that we're planning to do with this work is to be able to record the interoception on the rat itself, so that we can see how they're reacting when they interact with each other and how they're reacting when they interact with the robots. And that might give us.
Could it be depositing any pheromones on the robot, for example, to label it, tag it as a friendly robot, friendly agent or something?
Yeah, it could be.
I think that prosthetics idea is actually one way to get to, to test several, or I don't know, at least, test some of the prediction from IIT, really. I mean, eventually we need to test things on ourselves, right? Like Marcello was saying, yesterday. One way is to reduce, parts of the brain inactivated by, local anesthesia or something, to see whether we can actually knock out color or, motion selectively and so on. But, maybe some, people are willing to implant something, in addition, to see if it enhances, or I don't know, if it changes some kind of quality.
Do you think we can buy an extra C module for knee
but even if,
at least he wants to implant something.
Even if it did change, though, what would it tell you? I mean, let's say you take a plant drug, And your consciousness changes, does it mean that?
It has to be more precise, or at least rough. There has to be some kind of rough prediction. Like if you connect MT with some external MT-like device, then maybe you see things slower, or what you used to see to the right motion needs to be now going to the leftwards or something like that.
Okay, so it has to be enhanced, not
very,
changed.
Very enhanced or changed, but specifically based on some theoretical prediction.
I had a question. I mean, obviously, beautiful experiments, and obviously show they highlight how cool rats really are. I'm not sure if I understood what it tells us about the potential consciousness in the actual eye rat. Like everything I saw was about the mouse or the rat itself, how he's interacting with the system and how he's integrating the information, how he's playing with it. But the eye rat...
The eye rat itself is not a particularly intelligent creature.
Yeah.
So I don't think these studies actually tell us anything about how intelligent the eye rat is. Those of us who work with it know it's not.
Okay.
What I think it helps us do is understand some of the timings that we need and the kinds of behaviours that are needed to form these complexes. So they help us with future designs.
Sorry, could you explain it a bit more? Because I still don't understand.
Some people think we should be talking solely about consciousness in robots. And I guess what my talk has been is not about consciousness in robots per se, but how we can use thinking about integrated information to analyze social dynamics better, particularly in this particular case, social dynamics between robots and other creatures.
So I guess my question is, what about this interaction tells us something about how we can use that?
The thing I think it tells us, number one, is how fast it is, the timescales. What it's based on, it's not based on physical similarity. It's not based on distressed sounds. It's actually based on an action in the past that established some pro-social behavior.
So you're talking about the interaction of these two individual things, the rat and the robot, and that's the interaction?
Yes, yes. So I'm thinking about the rat as being X and the robot as being Y, and the coupling, the transient coupling of when they come together. In many cases when they come together, I don't think the behavior is complex enough to do anything interesting. The robot's behavior is not in any way going to affect the rat down the track except as a novel object. But in these particular studies, I think it does. It's actually changing the rat. And if the robot were a conscious entity or an autonomous entity that could establish trust, possibly it would be changing the robot as well.
So before something happens to the rat, the system of robot and rat is conscious? Or it becomes conscious?
So something I should have said at the beginning was the robots are driven. So they have some onboard behaviours, particularly fast reactions to avoid bumping into things. But they are driven by an experimenter using a Wizard of Oz paradigm. So Wizard of Oz is the experimenter sort of behind the curtain, acting as if the system has a certain behaviour. In this particular case, the consciousness is not in the robot, but in Brian, who was driving it. So the coupling there is actually between Brian and the rat, but the rat doesn't know it. The rat thinks it's through the robot.
Is there a difference between the terms pro-social behavior and altruism?
Yes.
Are they the same thing?
I don't think so. When people tend to use the word altruism, it costs.
It costs, yeah.
It costs.
So I was wondering if you deliver the cost, if this rat could free the robot, but at a certain cost to itself.
Yes.
That would be altruism.
That would be altruism.
Interesting to explore that.
Yes.
And there's no evolutionary advantage.
Unless you said that they are more responsive to their kings. So unless the robot was appearing as the litter arrived, and he's one of them. And so it becomes part of the
And it can be
brotherhood, and then it might treat it as, oh, this is just another rat. And,
they don't actually need to be, in the Bartel study, they don't actually need to be raised necessarily together.
Okay.
2 weeks of rats being housed together will be enough for them to establish this prosocial behaviour. So between rat and rat. So we don't actually think we need the full raising together. Yeah. Bruno.
Is this a metaphor for like neural behavior? I mean, for example, so you can imagine that there's only a few forces in the universe. One of them is oscillations, and the other one is natural selection. You know, and consciousness in a way is when you kind of go against natural selection and come to an agreement. But there's parts of the brain that somehow come to an agreement. Is this a metaphor for that? That in the brain you have an agreement somehow that happens that's actually going against what each one would be doing separately? Is that part of what you're trying to say, or is it something?
I certainly think of the two in similar ways, which is why I showed heat simulation in the first part of the talk. The two parts of the brain that come together and couple, there are different reasons why they might. One is just, you know, the dynamics is heading in that direction. The other is a much more intentional thing, like the hippocampus and the cortex communicating. If one wants information from the other, it sends a signal which phase locks. If the other wants information, it sends the signal first when they phase lock in the other direction, so 90 degrees out of phase. In those particular cases, I think of those regions as acting semi-autonomously. They have a task to do, hippocampus has a task to do, it can do it most of the time independently. And I think of that like an autonomous agent, which sometimes couples with other parts of the brain and sometimes can do its job independently. So to me, it's not just a metaphor for anything in the universe, rocks and quarks and trees. It's when autonomous agents that actually have choice of what they have a selection of actions and they choose an action that enables them to couple.
It seems to be like, you know, things want to win basically. I think it's almost like a default thing. If you win, you're there, you're the one who exists. You know, so but then, you know, consciousness is a way of getting around that. That if everybody wants to win, you know, there's also a way to agree, and in a way it's almost poetic to think of it that way. And it happens on many different scales of time, right? So
yeah.
Neurons or behavior.
Yeah. If in biological creatures we think of it in evolutionary terms. In physical creatures, you would think of the coupling probably more in entropy or in energy terms, lower energy states of molecules, the way they fold, for example. Rather than thinking of it in terms of molecules wanting to win, having some conscious vibe.
Okay. Yeah, I'm thinking. So, yeah, several questions, but in your talk you mentioned you wanted to use some knowledge about consciousness to design robots or intelligence. I thought it might be interesting to try to have some sort of virtual evolutionary mechanism to maximize phi. You can eventually actually compute phi and then see what kind of behavior emerges. I think Lisa's work does something opposite. So she's making, she computed some sort of virtual evolution process, and then the system becomes smarter and smarter, and better fitted in the environment. But then phi increases. I thought maybe the opposite direction might be interesting.
I think that's a really interesting suggestion. Yes. Thank you.